But I want to call the subject of the film up here in front of the stage. So I do have a couple of questions. I'm sure the audience does too. But so you all were the first interracial couple at UNC?
No, we
or
were
in North Carolina?
No, we were the first public interracial marriage in Rocky Mountain.
Rocky Mountain, wow. Okay, all right. And
First public.
First public. And I'm just.
We didn't both go to UNC.
You didn't both go to UNC, no.
So this is this is a based on
Based on a true story, but
So
loosely based on
we
it.
met at Duke.
Oh, so now we need to know the whole story. We're gonna be here all night.
It's a long story now.
Well, there just needs to be a sequel, a prequel actually, a prequel. So you're the founder of Visions, and I don't know if that came through the story. I mean, I love the way they sort of like, the director and Visions decided to sort of like tell your story from beginning to current day. But I'm not sure that people know what your organization is.
Yeah. Visions is a consulting organization that works with nonprofit and for-profit groups in creating diverse environments. You hear this notion of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion a lot these days. When we started in 1984, we called it anti-racism work. And the idea is to help organizations learn how to see, recognize, understand, appreciate, and utilize cultural differences. And to look at that at the personal level and also at the systemic and cultural level. Right? So at all personal, interpersonal, systemic, and cultural levels.
In that work you started because of your growing up in
I started growing up in Rocky Mount in 1969. They desegregated our high school. That part is accurate. And I was I was part of a human relations commission that worked to bring Black and white students together, and that was in high school. And then I took it over to college and did that work in college as well. And then when I went to graduate school, my graduate school work was studying a concept that's called modern racism. By the time I went to graduate school in 75, yeah, the social psychology literature was saying that racism had all but declined in the United States. Yeah. And so our work was to illustrate the ways in which the character of racism was shifting so that old-fashioned racism was not seen as, quote, acceptable. And yet, I've been talking about this so much this year,
Right.
I kept arguing, there's 20 to 30% of people who aren't changing. What are we gonna do about them?
Right.
But our work was looking at how does racism play out among those of us who don't wanna be racist, but because of the history, can't help it.
Right.
In segregated neighborhoods, for instance, if you don't have genuine contact, you're not gonna have real information.
Right.
That's a subtle, not intentional,
Right.
but very much problematic part of the issue.
Of the struggle. And so a lot of that was, so did you think that you all, when you met, was this something, oh yeah, or was it like, I'm now falling in love with a white man, and I'm doing all this diversity and equity and inclusion work, but that was all part of it. It's not seeing that, but seeing it as someone who was right there in the struggle and working on that.
Yeah. When we first met, I was the first year. I wouldn't have dated a white person because I had, been brought up to think that you shouldn't. And then as I began to know white people more intimately, I realized that was misinformation. And so as I started John and I were friends, and I was friends with a lot of people, and I started to realize, he's kind of cute, he's kind of interesting. We're just like people fall in love.
And John, what about you and your background, and then meeting Valerie, and especially during that time when there was so much segregation and difficulty, and I'm sure you met with a lot of
I grew up in the Northeast New York, Boston nexus of left-wing politics and people involved in all kinds of liberation movements. And so I really didn't imagine a barrier. You know, what would possibly be the barrier to marrying someone of another race? That was where I was in my own development, and we were also had done the work together, the research together at graduate school about modern racism and internalized suppression and each of the elements of that, and that work, and then getting to know Val and getting to know that broader community, you know, sort of brought me face to face with the differences, the depth of cultural divide and separation, as well as the strengths of, you know, people being nice people.
And so it's interesting because you started this work, you know, came up in the 60s, 70s, and then created visions. And one of the things that it said was your focus is really on equity and inclusion. You have to hold that right above the focus on equity and inclusion is, are we adding diversity without paying attention? Was one of the things that sort of like I saw in the vision. So where do you think we are now with equity and inclusion? And are we just adding, you know, are we making a difference now? Are we going backwards? Are we coming forwards based on your work, based on what you've done and what you've gone through, being in the South and being an interracial couple, and then now we're at that state again where everyone's doing DEI. Are we still doing it without paying attention?
You know, I love the character of the movie saying 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. There's a really deep way in which I think this is a more negative era than in the past in terms of race relations and in terms of, you know, what people valuing each other. And there have been all kinds of exciting things that have happened in terms of gender relations and in terms of the organizing of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so, you know, I think our experience is that in a way we're in a bad place, and in a way there's been progress, and you know, we'll probably keep doing this work, and we're very excited about helping to support a new generation of young scholars and advocates and activists who are doing the same work and see it going forward.
Yeah, I've been sad and angry and depressed this last couple of years as I see how much those of us who can make a difference may not be doing what we need to be doing. I think it's really, we're really at a critical state in the United States because so many of the structural elements haven't yet been confronted. And I think I'm scared actually about, will we be able to do it? When we were doing this work, we started this work in 1984. I think we were, you know, we had the idealism of youth and being young people, and we thought that we could do this in our lifetime. We won't.
We didn't think we'd be at retirement and still talking about the next generation taking on the work.
Right.
So so we saw this film in Chapel Hill a few months back with a group of mostly young white activists, and I was encouraged by their willingness to acknowledge that they're still living in a white bubble. They don't really have the kind of contact that we had in those days. And most residential segregation is still, you know, hasn't changed up north, south, west, wherever. So the structural issues are what I'm really interested in, which goes to how are we going to change the Constitution, how are we going to change the balance of power.
Right.
And that's, we've been, you know, our work can do that in, you know, one organization. Like we might work with a university or a school, and you can make a difference.
Right.
But then it's like you build a sandcastle and the water comes and it takes the road away. So,
Yeah, we think there's something left. I mean, there's some residue left.
you're the optimist
I'm
today.
the optimist.
We go back and forth on that.
I'm
Sometimes
going to
people
open it up
are-
to questions.
This is a superficial question, but I just wanted to know what it was like for each of you to see somebody play your spouse
Oh, yes.
and play yourself and play your friends. Like, did you look and say, well, that's not Martha at all? Did she meet her? It's exactly what she was like.
You know, for me, it was actually relieving to see the film because it was different enough that I didn't get anxious. But it was also fun. And I don't know if you've noticed this. A couple of you know my daughter. They surprised me. She's into acting. And my niece and my daughter are actually in the film. And I didn't know that at the time. So it was fun to watch it as I let go of having it to be me. And we met that.
Did you also look at your spouse and the person playing your spouse and say, oh, that was him?
John used to have long hair, so it was good. It was cool. And we met the actors and actresses, and they were very nice people. So it was fun. How was it for you?
For me, watching it over and over again, I kind of feel like the character captures me more than I'm really willing to acknowledge. So it's fun. The details of the story being different are like. In terms of Val, honestly, I'm a little disappointed. It doesn't capture how hard she works and how hard she worked at learning the material, at developing these ideas, at kind of building and sustaining relationships with organizations and individuals who move the career forward. So in the movie, the young lady is lovely, and she kind of drifts through her life experience, and Val reached at it much harder. So
being just a little older than the couple before us, I had a question. I know in the 60s, and many places in the South, this was true in Atlanta, where I was in that time, there were groups like the Southern Council. There were groups that existed with some mission of social healing of one variety or another. You both start Visions young, and I'm curious what insights gave you a different perspective, and instead of just allying with one of those existing entities, to conceive of a different one that then had a mission perhaps more precisely focused. So I'd just really love to hear some of the thought process that helped make a new perspective that becomes Visions.
If I understand your question, or what comes to my mind in response to your question, first is that the Human Relations Commission is a national organization. There are Human Relations Commissions in a lot of cities and towns that were started in the 60s also. And Rocky Mount, Rocky Mount started one that was run by the chamber or one of the town agencies. And the person who was running that gave us insight into what they were doing. This is when we had the high school Human Relations Commission. When we went to Carolina, when I went to Carolina, the Black student movement was, we were in the largest class of Black students to go to UNC in 1970. And the Black student movement was very active and was connected with the Black Panther Party, which was also active on campus. So those were the sort of groups that fueled our activism energy at that point. And we also, and I talk about, we also had several sociology classes where they had explicit attention to bringing Black and white students together. So I got caught up in all of that. We took over the administration building in 1972. It was biracial. So we did a lot of it was local, but it was connected with some of the national movements. Not so much the Southern Regional Council is the one that was, I actually did an internship for the Southern Regional Council in Atlanta. That was my first experience of being in a Black chocolate city and seeing Black folks running the gas stations and all of that. The project I worked on was called the Black Appalachian Commission, but it was a subgroup of the council, of the Southern Regional Council. So that was also an influencer as well. Yeah.
I think it would be one more time for one more question, sorry.
You said that you had been angry this past year, and I can understand that because I have been too, maybe since 2015. What do you do to continue doing this work after all these years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because, you know, I guess, you know, well, just, let me say it this way. I learned early on in my life that if I was gonna live, I needed to be committed to this work. That I just couldn't see myself letting it go. So it became, I figured out how to make a living out of it, right? So visions came out of how do you do anti-oppression work in a way that can also allow you to eat. And so that's how we really got invested in that, and we're a nonprofit, and we sustained ourselves since 1984 with our blood, sweat, and tears. And I am the new executive director was going to be here today, but unfortunately her father-in-law is not well, and he's not getting better. So I'm sad about that. But she's the next generation, and they're going to figure out how to keep it going. And I think that's the other thing in terms of hope. We just finished, I guess it was 2 years ago, training 22 new people, of whom maybe 16 are under 45. So they're you know, looking at these issues with the excitement and enthusiasm. They keep us going. They keep us enthusiastic. So I feel like we did it in a way that allowed people to want to be there. In fact, and then those of us who are older, we have a group of about 15 people who are over 65. They say. And I said, I never thought we would create an organization where people didn't want to retire.
I mean, unfortunately, the work, there's still so much work to
There's
do.
plenty of work.
And as you said, 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, but you can't fall back, you have to just keep pushing forward.
Yeah, and you have to take breaks, you have to rest. You have to definitely rest.
Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you for being the subject of a wonderful film.